You sit beside me, and outside the mountains have disappeared. We're now closer to the coast. The smell of salt is in the air. And I remember an old man I once met in Mangalia, far south in Romania, where the Danube flows into the Black Sea. A shepherd, one would say, but he was much more than that. His name was George, and he was perhaps 70, 80 years old. I could hardly tell. His face was deeply lined by the sun, by decades in the heat and wind, by years of standing on the dry fields between Constanza and the sea. He always wore a wide hat of felt, gray already with age and sun, and his flock, not huge, perhaps 200 sheep, followed him everywhere like a great living cloud of white wool. These sheep were a Romanian breed, the Tokaj, with long legs and a smart, almost melancholy gaze. Gheorghe didn't move like an old man. He was slow, yes, but not unsteady. He had an inner confidence, a way of walking that showed this man had lived in harmony with the land his whole life. He didn't speak much, but when he did, it was with a calm that was contagious. I asked him one morning why he still worked at his age, and he answered me with a smile. Because the sheep still get hungry, and the sun still rises. What else should I do? Sit at home and wait to die? The flock had its own rhythm, its own code of communication with George. There was an old song he whistled, a shepherd's song, he said, that his grandfather had sung. And when the sheep heard this song, they'd gather automatically. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. That was the agreement between shepherd and flock, a contract thousands of years old. He needed no stick, no dog, only his whistle and his presence. The landscape he tended wasn't lush. It was dry, sandy fields with scattered bushes, with herbs that grew only in this region with names I didn't know. But Gheorghe knew every plant, every blade of grass. He knew which herbs the sheep loved, which would harm them, which were rich in nutrients in this season. You see this clover here? He said, and pointed to something very fine. That's the best feed at this time. The sheep will be happy from it, the milk will be rich, the cheese will be sweet. He rubbed a leaf between his fingers and smelt it, nodded with satisfaction. The closeness to the sea shaped this kind of shepherd culture. The Black Sea to the south, the Danube to the east. Water was everywhere in this area, sometimes invisible, but always present. Gheorghe told me the sheep needed the salty breath of sea air, that it was good for them, that in the hills near Constanza it simply tasted better, smelled better. In winter, when the wind turned brutal, he'd drive the herd sometimes southward to Mangalia, where it was slightly warmer, where the fields were still greener. I spent an entire day with him, and it was like traveling to another time. We woke before the sun, about 4 in the morning, and wandered with the flock to the day's best pasture. The path led over steep hills, through damp valleys, past an old military building from Soviet times, now abandoned, overgrown with weeds. The sheep moved with a patience that calmed me. There was no pushing, no hurrying, just the slow, sure movement of a group of animals that knew where it was going. At midday, we rested under a great tree, an acacia, I think, with broad leaves and dark shade, and Gheorghe brought out his food, black bread, a kind of cheese he'd made himself, a little salt. He offered me some too, and I ate with him, and the cheese was creamy, salty, with a sweet hint of the flowers the sheep had eaten. That's the work of 3 generations, he said while chewing. The cheese, the sheep, the ability to make the food. My son, he lives in Bucharest. He chose a different life. My granddaughter wants to leave too. That's okay, the world changes. But something is lost when no one sings the song anymore, when no one knows the old ways. He told me of difficult years, of drought times when no rain came and the grasses withered, when he drove the herd ever further north, always searching for water and green fields. The summer of 2002, he said, was one of the hardest. 3 months without a drop of rain, temperatures above 40 degrees Celsius. He had to wake every night to bring the sheep to water, to the old well at Constanza. Many died. He lost about a third of his flock that summer. It took years to rebuild. But there were moments of joy, of plenty too. Spring 2015 was mild and beautiful, with much rain at exactly the right times. The flock multiplied faster than ever before. The lambs were large and strong. The milk was rich. He'd made more cheese, sold more wool than ever before. By the end of the year, he had enough money to renovate his old house, buy new tools, even hire a young man from the village to help him with the flock, a rarity in these times when young people all left the villages. George also showed me his old tools, the shears for shearing the sheep, made of steel but rusted by the salt air, yet still sharp. The cheese molds, made of wood, with patterns carved into the top, signs of family, of tradition. The spindle on which he spun the wool, old enough to come from his grandfather, polished by thousands of hands. "Everything I need is here," he said. "I'm not poor, you understand. I have everything I need. That's the difference between life and mere survival." The old man's philosophy was simple and profound at once. He believed every animal was an individual, that every sheep had its own character, its own needs. He called them all by name, not with numbers like modern shepherds, but with real names. The large white mare he called Rosa, because she always went at the head of the flock. The ram he called Barbu, because his chin was dark like a beard. He knew every sheep, its health, its ability to bear lambs, its personality. And the sheep knew him, trusted him, ran to him if he was in trouble. In the afternoon, as the sun began to set, we slowly drove the flock to a pen, a large open area bounded by wooden fences where the sheep spent the night. George had a small shed beside it where he slept, close to the flock, ready for any problem that might arise in the night. He showed me his bed, a simple bed of straw and an old wool blanket, and his fire where he made his tea and prepared his simple evening meal. Before I left, George gave me a piece of his cheese wrapped in paper and a packet of wool he'd carded and spun himself. "Don't forget where you've been," he said. "The world gets fast, but here it's still slow. That's good. The slowness matters." He stood there in his shepherd's clothes with his old eyes and watched me go while I descended toward the hills, toward the train that would carry me away. And now, as we approach the coast, I imagine George and his flock are still there on the dry fields between Constanza and Mangalia, beneath the great black sky with stars so bright in that region. And you close your eyes, and I hear the shepherd whistling his old song again, and the sheep follow, and you glide gently, gently into sleep. Imagine you're sitting on the night train from Warnemünde to Rostock, and outside we can still see the silhouettes of coastal towers gliding past. Next to you sits a woman with sun-bleached hair and eyes like the open sea. She's just told you that she grew up here, up in the Warnemünde Lighthouse, in that great white pillar pointing like a finger toward heaven. She says her childhood was one endless gentle rhythm, the light circling every 4 seconds, round the clock, round her heart. The fog signals through the mist when the sea grew so gray that sky and water couldn't be distinguished anymore. The metallic sound of the stairs under her bare feet, 158 steps, she knew every one, each reminded her of a song. Her father was the lighthouse keeper, a quiet man with salt crystals in his beard, and her life unfolded between these red brick walls, while above the rotating mirror turned the night into bright gold. She knew no other world, needed no other world. Why should she? But then, she says quietly, then came the summer night when she was 16 and understood for the first time what the light really meant. A ship had got into trouble out on the Baltic Sea. She still remembers the horror of that moment when she heard the distress signal, that howling, desperate tone echoing through the radio. Her father's lighthouse beam became a lifeline for the 20 people aboard. 30 knots of wind, ton-heavy waves, and this one light beam that meant everything. And in that night, she understood that the lighthouse wasn't simply her home, but a promise that every light sent into darkness carried salvation. The years slipped away like water through her fingers, she says, and the light became automated. The light that had been her life became a machine. The human hand was no longer needed. Not her father with his oil cans and his cleaning rituals. Not the lighthouse keeper's family who had watched over that place for 200 years. Her father was pensioned off. The tower became a museum for tourists stumbling up once a week saying ooh and ah. And she left it. But not because she wanted to forget. She left it to carry its light onward, in her heart, in her words, in every hope she gave to people she met on the street. She became a traveler, she says, still is one. She's met hundreds of wanderers, pilgrims and wanderers, people who felt lost in the world without finding a way home, people who needed someone to tell them they weren't alone, and she told them about the power of a light that never goes out, about her father up on the tower, about the night his light saved 30 lives. She told them that every life could be a lighthouse, if you were willing to shine. She shows you a photograph from her bag, an old, yellowed, black and white one. The Warnemünde Lighthouse as it must have stood around 1920, with a grandfather on the gallery at the top. And underneath, in the finest script, one word: hope. That single word has been the program for her life. She travels with this photograph everywhere, shows it to people and says, look, here's the place where I learned that hope needs structure, a foundation, a bright light in the darkness. And then perhaps you have the strength to pass it on. The lighthouse still stands there on the headland of Warnemünde, and even though the light beams no longer rotate by human hand, she knows that its existence still guides ships, not with fire and glass and oil anymore, but with memory and love. People like her who grew up there, who understood the secret of the light, they carry it out into the world. They become lighthouses for others. That night, as you sit on the train and the coast slowly glides past, she tells you of another summer night 2 years ago when she sat up in the tower during a storm and the automatic light worked as it should. But then she noticed a man on the street below, lost and disoriented, and she ran down and out into the storm and showed him the way to safe shelter. And that man, she says, later wrote her a letter. He wrote that on that night, the lighthouse had taken on human form for him. That's the most beautiful thing you can say about such a thing. And then she tells you something more, something tender, that she loves most of all to sit in the lighthouse in the early morning hours, just before the summer dawn breaks. The light is still active because the sun isn't yet strong enough, but already the dark blue of the sky seeps in and mingles with the warm gold of the lamp. And in those few minutes, she says, she speaks with her father, who died long ago, but is still present in those light rays, still real, still with her. She tells him of the people she's met, those she's given hope to, the tears they've shed together. And the light answers with a quiet turning, a gentle gleam, a rhythm like a heartbeat of love. She's also told you that sometimes, when it grows very dark, when new sorrow comes upon her, she lies down and closes her eyes and imagines the light beams of the tower passing through her, as though she herself had become the glass of the tower, transparent to the light of her father. And then even her tears fall asleep, gently and sweetly, because she knows she's not alone, that up there a light still rotates, even if a machine does it now. She also has favorite places on her travels, she tells you. Small places where people have learned to hope again. A railway station in Poland where she helped a girl who wanted to run away. A lake in Austria where she listened to an old man who thought his life was over. A cafe in a small town in Schleswig-Holstein where a photograph of her now hangs on the wall. The woman who brings lights, it says beneath. These places have become lighthouses for her, little islands of grace showing her that her path was right. Outside, The coast railway rushes past silent summer villages. The woman turns her gaze to the window, and you see how the moonlight gently illuminates her profile, just as the lighthouse fire once did in her face. She says that every year she comes back to climb her old staircase, to see the vastness of the sea and renew the promise that somewhere in the darkness people need a light, and she will try to be that light for them. A lifetime long. And you know, she says very quietly, you know what the most beautiful thing is? The most beautiful thing is that you don't need to be up in the tower to be light. You can be anywhere, on every train like this one, in every waiting room, on every street, in every moment when someone needs you. You just need to be willing to shine. You just need to turn your inner mirror outward and give out the fire of your heart. You must open yourself to the darkness of others and not look away. Then the whole world becomes a network of lighthouses, and no one needs to travel alone in the darkness anymore. Tiredness falls upon you like the summer night, gentle and endless. The rhythmic sound of the rails under the train becomes beats of a great heart, and the story of the lighthouse keeper's daughter merges with your own dreams. You see the rotating mirrors, hear the fog signals, feel the cold metal stairs under your feet as you climb the 158 steps higher and higher into the light. And in that light, you finally fall asleep, safe and protected, like someone watched over by a lighthouse, while outside, the coast glides past and all the ships are saved. And the landscape outside grew softer. The outlines of trees dissolved. The fields became dark expanses over which the moon sometimes let its pale light glide. I felt my breathing grow slower, felt my heart grow slower, felt my whole body sinking down into the warm embrace of the seat cushion, into the warm embrace of this train carrying me without my needing to do anything. That was a good feeling, a rare feeling, to be carried without effort, simply trusting that the wheels keep rolling, that the rails lead on, that morning will eventually come. Imagine you're on the train from Ottersee to Muncie, and sitting beside you is an older woman with strong arms and a smile that glimmers like water. She tells you that she's spent her whole life running a ferry across the lake, a small lake hardly anyone knows, somewhere between the Alps and the green nothing. She says her ferry was only a small boat, painted green with red seats and named Sophia. 30 people could fit, but usually there were fewer. Old people wanting to get to their gardens, mothers with children, young people going to school from the other shore. Every crossing was only 15 minutes across still water, past reed belts and hanging willows. Her father had inherited the ferry, and she was supposed to follow him one day. So simple, so natural as breathing. But modernity came, she says, and modernity needs fast roads and bridges. A consortium wanted to build a dam, wanted to connect the two shores and make the ferry unnecessary. She would have become unemployed. Her boat, Sophia, would have belonged in a museum. But she refused. She fought, wrote letters, attended community meetings, spoke of the 30 people who depended on her daily, of the rhythm that ferry journey brought to their lives. And something wonderful happened. The people helped her. Not the great ones, not those in charge, but the small ones. The old gentleman who traveled across every day to tend his garden, he told his grandchildren about the ferry woman. The mother with the little boy, she wrote protest letters because she said this was a world her son needed to understand, that not everything needs to be fast. And slowly, very slowly, the community's opinion changed. The dam was never built. She tells you of summers when the water was smooth as glass and the mountains reflected in it like in a dream. She tells you of winters when she had to break ice to keep the route clear. She tells you of a girl who regularly traveled, always at the same time, always with the same questions. until she understood that the girl was afraid of water and that the ferry journey was her therapy. Today, that girl is a mother and travels with her own daughter in the Sofia. The routine of the ferry was her life, she says. Wake at 6, check the engines, prepare the tickets, listen to the same song on the radio that she'd been hearing for 40 years. And that wasn't boring. It was like a prayer. It was like repeating something sacred, something necessary. Continuity was a blessing for her, not a punishment. She shows you photographs from her bag, yellowed Polaroids of people she's met over the years. There's the woman with the pram, who today is a doctor. The boy with the school bag, who today is a mayor. The old man who came daily and later died. But before he did, he wrote a letter thanking the ferry woman because her ferry was the last beautiful thing he saw before the darkness came. And when age announced itself, she says, when her arms grew weaker and the morning routine became a burden, something beautiful happened. The town hired a young man to help her, but not simply like that, but on her condition, that he learn from her, that he treat the Sofia with the same love and respect. And that young man, she says, he'll continue the ferry when she retires. The chain won't be broken. She also tells you of the storms. There were moments when the water grew wild, when the little green ferry almost capsized. And in those moments, she says, she felt that she wasn't alone, not just because of her passengers, but because the water itself protected her. It was as though the lake had made a pact with her. You may cross me again and again, and I will help you. And that promise was never broken. In 50 years, she's never lost a soul. She also tells of the summer when two lovers met on the ferry. They traveled daily together, always at the same time, at first sitting hesitantly beside each other, then hand in hand, finally with a ring on her finger. And when they married, they asked that the wedding take place on the Sofia, on the floating church as they called it. A small priest, music from the radio, and the whole community on the shore as witnesses. That was the happiest day of her life, the ferry woman said. Not only the wedding day for those two, but also hers, her wedding to the water and the life she leads. Sometimes, she says, people came aboard her ferry with grand dreams, people who wanted to go to Paris or Switzerland. They told her their plans, their hopes, and she listened while the little boat glided across the water. And half an hour later, when they reached the other side, something had often changed in them. The ferry journey had given them time to think. Some of the grand dreams were suddenly not so large and pressing anymore. Others became clearer, purer, truer. She believes the ferry is a kind of purgatory, not to atone for guilt, but to find truth in what you want. Trains running across lakes are faster, but not better, she tells you. They don't give you time to see the water, to feel that the earth is alive, to understand that time isn't just a factor, but a gift. A ferry crossing is an act of slowing down, an act of rebellion against haste. It forces you to synchronize your heartbeat with nature, to recalibrate yourself to the slow pulse of the world. It forces you, for a while, to be only here, on this boat, between two shores, between two lives. And that's exactly the place where people find themselves again. She also says the ferry taught her what patience means. Not the impatience of the modern world that constantly waits for speed, but real patience. Patience with the water, with the seasons, with age. The ferry can't go faster, no matter how much people press. And that's a blessing. That's a trick the world has forgotten, that sometimes the slowest is the fastest because it brings you closer to your destination. And now, she says, now on this train running from Attersea to the other lake, she feels an era is ending. Next summer, she'll pilot the Sofia for the last time, and then she'll have to be very still. Will have to accustom herself to a different rhythm, the rhythm of retirement, of travels, of solitude. She doesn't know if she can manage that, but she hopes that the people she's carried, that they'll carry this rhythm onward, that they'll remember the stillness of the ferry when they're in a hurry. Outside, the lake glides past, smooth as a mirror under the summer sun. The ferry woman leans her head back and closes her eyes, and you see that she's smiling, as though once more feeling the familiar movement of the boat beneath her feet, the last crossing before retirement, the love that lives in every wave. And as the rail beneath you speeds faster, as the train carries you on from lake to lake, you begin to fall asleep, thinking of a small green fairy named Sophia, of a woman with strong arms and a heart full of water, of the gentle power of slowness. Your eyes grow heavy, and you sleep, sinking into the stillness of the ferry, into the eternal movement between two shores, where time flows differently, slower and wiser, until you too glide into that dream and no longer know whether you're traveling or have arrived. Imagine you're on the train between Travemünde and Lübeck on a summer evening, and beside you sits an old woman with salt crystals in her hair and eyes reflecting the blue of the Baltic. She tells you that for 65 years she's been renting beach baskets, always on the same beach, every year, every day. Her story begins in the 60s, when the sea was still rough and tempestuous, and the world seemed unmoored. A man, who would later become her husband, gave her a single beach basket, not from luxury, but from necessity. She needed work. The beach needed someone to protect people and give them a place. And so she began renting one basket, then 2, then 10, then 50. And now, she says, she has 180 baskets, all lined up like soldiers of love. But these 180 baskets aren't simply furniture. Every basket has a story. Every basket has names carved into the wood. There's the red basket, where the twins fell in love. The green one, where a grandmother taught her granddaughter to swim. The yellow one, where an old man sat and ate the same sandwich every day and watched the sun until he died. And she remembers all the names, all the stories, all the moments that happened under her care. The work is hard, she tells you. Every morning at 5 o'clock, get up and clean the baskets, mind them up, fluff the cushions, collect the lost things, wallets, earrings, wedding rings, children's diaries. She has a large box full of lost treasures, and sometimes people come back years later searching for their memories. She gives them back what she's found. That's part of her job. She tells you of summers when the heat was merciless and people searched for shade and coolness. She'd regularly have ice cream carts beside her basket stands, and she sold frozen fruit and lemonade. She tells you, too, of autumn storms when the baskets wanted to blow away and she'd stay up all night to secure them so they'd still be there the next morning for the people who needed them. She also tells you that the baskets have had lives of their own. Some grew so old that they had to die. The straw became porous, the wood splintered. And when she had to retire a basket, that was like a death in the family. She held farewell ceremonies. She'd bring people who loved that basket, and they'd sit in it one last time before the end. And then she didn't dispose of some baskets, but placed them in her museum in the back of the beach, a cemetery of love, she says. One of her favorite memories is of a wedding couple. 30 years ago, a young man came to her and asked whether he could marry on one of her beach baskets. She said yes, but not simply so. She prepared everything. She decorated the basket with roses. She invited all the other basket users to be witnesses. And the best part? All 180 baskets were decorated with white ribbons for that day. It was as though the entire straw roof of the beach was celebrating a wedding. She also says she's learned to read people. She knows which person needs a quiet place and who seeks company. She knows who is sad and who is joyful. She knows which children are ill and which are simply mad with joy. And she gives each guest the right basket, not the most beautiful, but the right one. The beach basket rental woman is at the same time a psychologist, a mother, a priestess. She remembers a woman who came every day alone and sat in the same basket, the blue one. This woman didn't speak a word, just sat and looked out at the sea. The basket rental woman understood. The sea was her therapy, and so she reserved the blue basket for her year after year. When the woman died after 5 years, a car, a mistake, just like that, the basket woman grieved as for a friend. She hasn't rented that basket since. It stands empty on the beach and still waits, she told you, for the woman who never comes back. The modern world wants efficiency, she tells you. It wants people to book beach baskets by app, to register online, for everything to be digitalized. But she's refused. She still conducts her business by hand, in a large notebook that's been growing for 40 years. This act of writing, opening the book, searching for the right entry, that's not inefficient. That's intimate. That's personal. That's important. She says the app world would kill the soul of the beach. When you book a basket by mobile phone, there's no encounter, no possibility that she sees you and understands that you're going through a difficult time and that you need a place with a view of the infinite. The baskets aren't simply products to rent. They're therapists, friends, priests. She also has favorite seasons for her work. Spring she likes most, she says, because people rush out like birds let out of a cage. Summer is exhausting but beautiful because the light is so golden. Autumn is melancholic and tender. That's when families come together again, when grandparents place their grandchildren in the baskets and show them the sea. Winter she doesn't like. The beach grows empty, the baskets sleep and dream. And then she tells you too about the children who've grown up on her baskets. Some came as babies and saw beach basket and sea for the first time. Now they're adults and bring their own children. It's like a family tree structure, she says, where the baskets are the roots. She's watched several generations, has seen grandmothers teaching their daughters, mothers teaching their sons. The beach becomes, through her baskets, a place of continuity, a point in time where people lose themselves and find themselves again. She shows you a photograph from her bag, a black and white image of herself as a young woman in front of her first beach basket, with a smile as bright as the sun. She says sometimes she doesn't recognize herself in that photograph. The girl there, she was so full of hope, so full of strength. And then she looks at her hands, aged by decades in sun and salt, and she says, "But I recognize my work. It's still the same love." It's almost time to retire, she tells you. Her daughter will take over the beach baskets. And that frightens and delights her at the same time. Frightened because the beach won't look the same without her. Delighted because the love will go on, in other hands, but with the same spirit. The 180 baskets will gather 100 more stories, and perhaps, she tells you with tired but happy eyes, perhaps a new beach basket woman will one day sit at a train window and tell a similar story. And the circle will close. Outside we see the silhouettes of beach baskets gliding past, little points of color at the horizon as the train moves on. The old woman leans against the window and her eyes become soft and drowsy. And you see how the summer night grows thicker around her, how the light of the baskets begins to glow in her dreams. And now, in this silence of the train, while the rails beneath you segment the landscape, while the lights of Travemünde and Lübeck slowly take over your eyes, you too begin to fall asleep into the story of the beach baskets. You no longer see the 180 baskets as objects, but as beds for dreams, as altars for memories. And you fall asleep beneath a roof of straw and soul, while the old woman beside you whispers, "Come back soon. I have a place for you, the right place. Just wait." And the beach, it falls asleep too, and all the baskets dream together of those who've loved them and will love them still. I closed my eyes. Just for a moment, I thought. Just for a moment. But then came the images behind my eyelids. No clear images, just colors, soft colors, blue and gray and a little gold from the lamp in the compartment. and these colors mixed into something that was no longer seeing and not yet dream. The train went on, ta-dum, and each ta-dum was a little further away, as though the train wasn't quite in the same space as me anymore, as though I were already half elsewhere, half in that land where tiredness makes its home, where everything becomes simple. Imagine you're on the train from Konstanz to Meersburg early in the morning, before the sun has properly risen, and beside you sits a woman of middle age with wet hair and the pink skin of someone just come from ice-cold water. She smiles at you and says she's just come from swimming. Every morning, she says, for 20 years. She tells you that she wakes at 4:30, not because of an alarm, but because her body knows it's time. She gets up, puts on her dark swimming costume, takes a towel, and goes down to the lake. Lake Constance, that great, still expanse of water which is still dark when she arrives. The water is cold all year round, but especially in autumn and winter it's a test of will and love. She tells you that swimming in the early morning isn't a sport. It's a ritual, a prayer, a meditation. She enters the water and everything else fades. The worries, the work, the disappointments, the hopes that haunt you by day. The water receives her and makes her new. Every single morning, she says, "I die and am born again." That's not metaphorical, it's literally true. She swims without purpose, she tells you. She doesn't swim from point A to point B. She simply swims, and the water carries her. Sometimes she swims far out until the land becomes small and she sees only sky and water. Sometimes she stays closer to shore and watches the sun rise behind the mountains. And sometimes, and these are the most precious moments, she doesn't swim at all, but simply floats, weightless, in that borderland between sky and earth. She says that during these morning swims, she has hallucinations, but not the bad kind. She sees things that aren't there. She sees her own life before her, year by year, like a film. She sees moments she's forgotten, and suddenly they make sense. She sees people she's loved and who've died, and they come back as lights in the water. And she's not alone. She knows there are other water people out there, at other lakes, in other countries, all swimming at the same time, all supporting each other through the early hours and the cold. She began to swim, she tells you, after a crisis. She was married to a man who didn't understand her. She had children who loved her, but to whom she couldn't give everything they needed. She worked in an office that was slowly draining her soul. And one morning, she still remembers the smell of the air, the bird that was singing. One morning she decided to go to the lake. She took a towel with her and simply jumped in. The first time was a shock. The water was cold, her lungs screamed, and she almost choked on fear. But she swam, and with each stroke she pulled out a thought, a pain, a sense of shame. She swam until she couldn't anymore, and then she dried off and went to work. And the next morning she went again, and again. And at some point she understood that the water didn't just clean her, but renewed her. She shows you her hands, long, strong hands with skin peeling at the fingertips from years of swimming. She says that she's met other swimmers in the water, though they never really speak to each other. There's an etiquette among morning swimmers. You nod to each other, you're there for each other, but you respect the silence. Once, she says, there was a morning when the water was so cold that an older woman got into trouble, and 3 swimmers, complete strangers, came together and helped her to shore. She also speaks of the physical effect, how much swimming has changed her body. She's grown stronger, but also more fragile. Her bones are denser, her muscles defined, but her skin has become thin, almost papery from decades of salt and sun. She wears this with pride. These aren't signs of age, she says, but signs of life lived in fullness. She tells you too of a winter when the water was so cold she thought she'd die. Her hands turned blue, her lips turned white, and feeling disappeared from her extremities entirely. But she swam on. She swam until her soul was so far away from her body that she could observe both from above, watch this woman swimming in the water like a phantom. And later, when she lay on the shore and could draw herself back into her body, she knew she'd crossed a threshold, that she could no longer live a normal life. She was now water's servant for the rest of her life. She says that the water has taught her to let go of control. In normal life, we try to control everything, our time, our feelings, our future. But in the water doesn't care whether you have control or not. The water carries you or it doesn't, depending on your trust, not your strength. And so she's learned to trust life. She's learned that things she can't control often have the best solutions. And these morning swims, she says, have also taught her what patience means. She comes in the morning, and sometimes the water is like glass, perfect, calm. And sometimes it's wild and rough and doesn't want to welcome her. But she goes in anyway, she swims anyway. She trusts that the water knows what she needs. Some mornings her body needed the calm of clear water. Some mornings her soul needed the challenge of waves. She also asks whether you've ever tried to sleep at the same time as the rest of the world. Whether you've ever tried to live normal rhythms. She tried, she says, and it made her sick. Her soul needs this other rhythm, the rhythm of water, of moon, of stars. And so she's an outsider, and that's all right. The best people are outsiders. She's also lost her husband, she tells you. He wasn't a swimmer, and so he could never really follow her into the darkness and the water. But he respected it. He always said, "Go swimming, go to yourself." And one morning, she'd just come from the water, her hair still wet. He died, a heart attack in his sleep. And she was sad, but not surprised. She knew his heart didn't beat to this other rhythm, that he had to die in the normal world while she lived in the world of water. She often thinks of him when she swims. She imagines that he swims too now, somewhere, in another lake. Outside it's growing lighter, and the train travels through a landscape slowly gaining color. The lake she's just left comes into view, and for a brief moment, you and she can see the water through the window, and you see a single swimmer there just coming out of the water, drying herself off, and moving toward the train to continue the journey. And in this stillness of early morning, while the rails beneath you create this gentle rhythm, while the air is still cool from the night, you begin to fall asleep into this woman's story, this morning goddess of water. You see yourself standing at the lake, feeling the cold water, trusting yourself without purpose, without goal, simply to be, to breathe, to be renewed. And the dream carries you forth, further and further out, until you too become part of this faithful water, until you too are a morning swimmer, until you too understand that the best time to live is when the world still sleeps and everything is possible. Imagine you're on the train from Wismar to Rostock on a warm summer night, and beside you sits a woman with hands like tools and eyes like the open sea. She's just told you that for 35 years she's tended the small harbor light of Wismar. She says that the light she tends isn't large like the great lighthouses. It's just a small lamp on top of an iron post, perhaps 2 meters high, overlooked by ships and tourists. But it's her light. It's her task, and it's the most important thing in the world. Every evening when the sun sets, when the darkness comes, she lights the lamp. And every morning when the sun rises, she puts it out. That's her rhythm. That's her life. The lamp turned 125 years old. It's an old petroleum lamp, which has been converted to electricity, but the spirit is still the same. The lens is Fresnel, French glass that refracts and distributes light like a prayer. And in every mechanical tick of this lamp, she hears the story of all those who've used this light. the seafarers who found their way into this harbor, the fishing boats that returned safely to their families. She became the beacon woman, she says, not from profession, but from love. She was a fisherwoman, came from a family of fishers, and one day she fell in love with the beacon master, a quiet man with salt in his beard who cared only for his light. And when he died, unexpectedly one morning without warning, she knew she had to take over his task. Not because she had to, but because the lamp had no soul without him. She tells you of the process of becoming a beacon woman. It wasn't easy. The authorities didn't want a woman. They said women didn't have the strength for this task. But she showed them her hands, her arms, her soul. She said that strength doesn't live only in muscles, but in the heart, and her heart was stronger than steel. And finally, they gave her the job. She was one of the first women in this profession on the entire Baltic coast. The task wasn't simple. She had to clean the lamp, polish the lens, clean the glass, all with her own hands in cold and wind. She had to carry petrol bottles that were heavy and stank. She had to stay awake at night, watching the flame, making sure it didn't go out. She had to go out in storms and check the lamp while waves gripped her legs. But she loved it, she says. The loneliness of the night, the responsibility for the ships, the feeling of doing something important. That was like a drug for her. She never suffered from sleeplessness, not because she was tired, but because she could always work. The night became her home. The harbor became her garden. The lamp became her child. She shows you her hands, weathered from decades, scarred by hot glass and sharp tools. She says each scar tells a story. There's the line across her wrist. That was when she grabbed the hot lamp to repair it. There's the missing half finger. That was an accident with the gears. There's the deep scar in her palm. That was a night during a storm when she fell from the window and tried to catch herself. She also speaks of the ships her lamp saved. There are records of it. 4 ships in the 1970s that didn't founder because of her light. A French trawler, a Dutch cargo ship, 2 fishing boats from Rostock. She doesn't know the names of the captains, but she knows hundreds of people are alive because of her light. And that's the greatest compliment she could receive. Once, she still remembers the smell of the air, the cold wind. She had a night when the lamp threatened to go out. The worst snowstorm in her time had begun, and the flame flickered, was nearly out. And she stood there, outside in the wind, in her thin coat, and prayed. She didn't pray to God, she didn't believe in God, but to the light itself. She asked the light to hold on, just one more night, just one more night. And the light listened. The light kept burning, weak but sure. And the next morning, when the police called and told her that a fishing boat had gone off course that night, but because of her, light had corrected course just in time, then she understood that the light and she were one, that the light had heard her prayers. She also tells you about the kittens, yes, kittens, that sometimes turn up at the lamp house. Abandoned kittens, fallen from ships or simply lost, and she takes them in, cares for them, and when they're big enough, she places them with fisher families. She says the lamp doesn't just save sailors, but animals too. It's like a lighthouse of grace, not just for those on the water, but for all who are lost. She feels the light is more intelligent than she is, she tells you. The lamp knows what the night needs. The lamp knows when it must burn brighter, when the fog is there. The lamp knows when ships are in danger, even before she sees the danger herself. It's as though the light is alive, as though it has its own intelligence, and she's only the light's secretary, translating and enabling its work. She never married, she says. She had lovers, fishermen and sailors and strange men who loved the night, but none understood that her first love would always be the light. And that was all right. She didn't meet a man to feel complete. The light was enough. The lamp was her family. The harbor was her husband. The night was her love affair. And she tells you one more thing. A moment from 3 years ago, when a young couple had a baby on a ship passing through her harbor. The labor began at night, and instead of giving birth in a hospital, the woman gave birth on that ship, under her light. And when the baby cried for the first time, the first light it saw was her light, the light of the beacon woman. And the captain wrote her later and said his child is called Light because it was born under her light. And that's the greatest gift. She also tells you that the light has made her old, but in a good way. Her skin is bronzed by wind and sun and salt spray. Her hair is white and tangled like seaweed. Her eyes have a depth that only someone has who's dared into the darkness at night and knows that light can be anywhere if you're only willing to sow it. Outside, we see the harbor lights of Rostock gliding past. Modern lamps, automated, soulless, without the hands of a woman tending them. The beacon woman looks out and smiles sadly. She says her light will soon no longer be needed, that technology will take over, that women like her will soon be museum pieces. But until then, she tells you very quietly, until then she'll go out every night and light the lamp. She'll use her hands to hold the lamp, to watch it, to make sure it burns. And in this moment, in this night, in this train, while you listen to her story, while the harbor light breaks into the darkness, you fall asleep in the gentle knowing that there are still people who give the world light, who still stay awake at night to protect others. And while the rail beneath you sings, while the lamp before the window burns and fades, you fall asleep beneath a roof of light and love. Fall asleep as someone who knows he's not alone in the darkness, that there's a woman watching for him, that she is his light. I met the well-master on a train through Graubünden on the Albula line, which winds its way up the mountain in tight curves and daring viaducts. It was a cool autumn day. The mountain stood clear and sharp against a pale sky, and the light had that particular quality you only get in October in the Alps. Thin and golden, and so transparent you think you could see through the air to the end of the world. He was a sturdy man in his mid-70s, with a face that looked hewn from granite, angular and solid and weathered, with eyes the color of glacier water, a bright, cold green that nevertheless seemed warm because the wrinkles around them pointed upwards, like a man who laughs a lot. His hands were short and broad, the hands of a man who'd spent his life working with stone and water, and beneath his fingernails there was a fine white lime dust that never completely washed away. He looked out the window at the mountains, at the small villages clinging to the slopes, and pointed to a well standing in a village square, an old stone well from which a thin stream of water flowed into a basin. "Mine," he said. "I built it 40 years ago. It still runs." He was a well master. "Well master," he said. "That's an old word for an old profession. We look after the water, the springs, the pipes, the wells, the reservoirs. We make sure water comes when you turn the tap, that it's clean and fresh and cold. People don't think about it. They turn the tap and there's water. But someone has to make sure. Someone has to know where the water comes from, how it flows, where it collects, where it's at risk. And that's me. That was me. For 45 years. He told me about the water in the mountains. The water here, he said, comes from far above, from snow that melts, from rain that falls, from the ice of glaciers that slowly weep, drop by drop, for thousands of years. The water seeps through the rock, through layers of limestone and granite and slate, and along the way it filters itself, cleanses itself, absorbs minerals, grows colder and clearer and purer with every meter. Sometimes a drop of water takes 30 years, he said. 30 years to travel from the surface to the spring. 30 years in darkness, in the rock, invisible. And then it emerges at a spring, clear and fresh and ice cold. And it tastes of mountain and stone and time. He told me how you find a spring. You have to listen, he said. The water speaks, not loudly, not obviously, but if you place your hand on the ground in the right place, you feel it. A fine vibration, a quiet pulsing, as though the earth has a heartbeat. And the heartbeat is the water flowing beneath the surface, invisible, unheard, but always there. I learned as a young man to find springs. My master took me to the mountains, made me kneel and said, "Listen." And I heard nothing. For weeks I heard nothing. And then, one day, I heard it. That quiet rushing beneath the earth, that whisper of water saying, "Here I am. Here I flow, forever, always." I asked him what the water had taught him, and he smiled with those glacier eyes and said, "Water always finds its way, always. You can dam it, you can divert it, you can force it into pipes and press it into channels, but in the end, it finds its way. It flows downhill, always downhill, toward the lowest point, and nothing can stop it. Not the hardest rock, not the thickest wall. It takes time, yes, sometimes 30 years, sometimes 100, sometimes 1,000. But it gets there. It always gets there. And along the way, it shapes the landscape, carves out valleys, wears stones smooth, hollows out caves. Not with force, with patience, with the endless, silent patience of water. He stepped out in a village so small the train only stopped for him. Put on his hat, shook my hand firm and brief, and walked away down the path toward the village, past a well from which clear water flowed into a stone basin. His well, his water, for 40 years. Water always finds its way. I think of that when I can't make progress, when the rock seems too hard and the path blocked. Then I remember the well master, his patience, the drop that takes 30 years, the water that comes, always. The train travels on, and the rain falls on the roof, and the rattle sounds like flowing water, quiet and clear and steady. And my eyes grow heavy, and I feel something in me coming to rest, like water that has reached the lowest point and grows still and clear and simply is. I sit across from you, and outside we're just passing through the hills of southern Slovakia. The sun sinks orange behind the first mountain ranges, and I remember a woman I met years ago in an orchard near Košice. You might know this too, these moments when a story comes back from nowhere, when the rhythm of the train pulls you into the past. The woman was called Zuzana, and she was not tall, hardly shoulder height, with hands marked by work, cracked like old tree bark. She stood among her apple trees, hundreds of them, old varieties that her grandmother had planted. Antigonon, gold parmain, some Russian hybrids hardy against the winter cold. The trees shimmered, still green in that season. It was summer, June, and the ground beneath the trees was warm and dry, a red-brown powder she moved through as though dancing. She showed me first the young fruits, still hard as rubber balls, the green buds that in coming weeks would swell. "This is the hardest time," she said to me in Slovak, slowly, so I'd understand. "June is the season of fear. Hail can destroy everything in a minute, everything." She pointed at the sky, which that day was still blue, harmless, but I saw in her gaze the fear of nature, the watchfulness that only someone lives with who depends on the whim of seasons. The garden was a labyrinthine system, not chaotic, but carefully planned. Between the fruit trees grew currant bushes, gooseberries, and at the edge of the property a tall hedge of elderflower and wild lilac, still full of blossoms in June. She explained that these plants weren't simply decoration, but part of an old Slovak farming tradition. The hedges were meant to attract insects that would pollinate the fruit trees, and at the same time shelter the garden from the cold wind coming from the north, from the Tatras. The harvest, she said, was a choreographed event. It began in August with the early varieties, the clarepful, which were sweet and would spoil quickly. These had to go right away to her customers in Kozice, to a small fruit shop that had been loyal to her. The later varieties, the gold parmenes, the Russians, those could be stored in an old cellar beneath the house that was cool enough to keep the fruit fresh until February. Some years, if the summer was hot, she could sell even until March. I asked her how long she'd been doing this. She laughed quietly, a sound like pebbles in a stream. "My whole life," she said. "My mother did it, and her mother too. But it was different before there were more gardens like mine. Now I'm one of perhaps 10, 15 in this area. The others sold, went to the cities. Their children don't want this anymore." She said it without sadness, just as fact, the way you'd describe the weather. The physical rhythm of her life was bound to the trees. In spring, the pruning, the treatment against pests with something she made herself from an old recipe, garlic, oil, and soap. In summer, the constant vigilance, watching the sky, watering during dry periods. She had a simple system of hoses running through the property, driven by an old motor. In autumn, the harvest, the sorting, the washing, the storing. In winter, she repaired her tools, planned the next spring, cut back the shrubs. She took me into a small workshop, a stone building older than the house, with thick walls. Here she stored the wicker baskets, hundreds of them in different sizes. Here she washed the fruit, a simple system of basins with water filtered through cloth. She also showed me her scales, an old mechanical scale her grandfather had bought, which still worked, still perfectly precise. "Quality is important," she said, while she took an apple in her hand, turned it, let the light fall on it. "Not all are the same. Some people think an apple is an apple, but no. This color here, that's not good. It's a bit too orange, which means this apple was in the sun a bit too long, and the flesh will become mealy. That one? Perfect. This color, this size, this shine. That's the apple my customers want." I spent the afternoon with her, and it was like stepping into another rhythm. A rhythm not determined by clocks, but by the work itself. She moved slowly, with the calm of someone who doesn't have to rush time. She had the time, or time had her. We finally sat under one of the largest trees, a Gravenstein so old its trunk was 2 meters across, and we drank fresh apple juice she'd pressed herself, still warm from the sun. She told me of years that were difficult. The cold year 2003, when the blossoms froze in May and there was almost no harvest. The year with hail, that was 2008, a summer thunderstorm that destroyed everything in half an hour, damaged hundreds of trees, entire rows of fruit crushed. She had to take out a loan to repair the trees, plant new ones. It took 3 years before the new trees could bear fruit again. But there were good years too. 2007 was a magical year, she said. A perfect summer. Not too hot, not too cold, with enough rain at the right moments. The harvest was so rich she could barely manage it all. She hired her niece, an old friend, and for 3 hours they all sat together under the trees, washing, sorting, packing. At the end of the day, Susanna's arms were raw, her legs hurt, but she was happy. That deep happiness that comes when the work has been good, when the harvest is rich. She asked me where I came from, and I told her about the trains, about many countries, about people I'd met. She listened as though I were telling stories from another planet, politely, curious, but also slightly distant. Her life was here, in this orchard, in Košice, in Slovakia. The world wasn't big for her, but it was complete. It was sufficient. I also asked her about market trends, about the big supermarkets coming from outside, about cheap imports from Spain and Italy. Her smile grew a bit sadder. Yes, that's a problem. The big chains don't want to deal with me. They want cheaper, always cheaper. My apples are too expensive for them. But I have my customers who've been loyal to me for 30 years. They know my apples aren't sprayed, that they're not treated with the chemical substances used everywhere else. That matters to them. She gestured toward her small workshop. Here I only buy soap and natural oil. That's all I need. My mother did it the same way, and the apples weren't different then, weren't worse. I also looked at her hands again. They were small but strong, the nails dirty from work, a bit broken but not neglected. These were the hands of a master, a woman who loved her work and exercised it with all her strength. She took another apple, pressed gently in, felt the firmness of the flesh. It's like a pulse, she said. Every apple you can feel. Is it still fresh, still alive, or is it starting to age? You don't need a machine for that. You just need hands, patience, and love. In the evening, when I had to leave to catch my train, she stood at the corner of the garden and waved to me, a small figure, alone among hundreds of trees that glowed golden in the sinking sun. She gave me a basket of apples for the journey, with a smile as warm as the fruit itself. Take care of yourself, she said. The world is big and sometimes hard. Here it's quiet. Here it's safe. And now, as we travel through the Slovak hills, through the same landscape where Zuzana tends her fruit trees, I see that garden again before me, the scent of blossoms in spring, the sweet aroma of ripe apples in summer, the care with which she touched every fruit as though each were a treasure. And I notice how you close your eyes, how the images of the garden, of the trees, of the light on the apples, slowly, slowly flow into your sleep. You're not asleep yet. I see it. The light is still in your eyes. So I'll tell you about a woman I met on my journey through Hungary, a winemaker from the Tokaj region, a region that's been making wine for thousands of years, since the Romans were there, perhaps even older. Her name was Magdolna, and she was a woman in her 60s, with silver hair she wore in a braid, with the face of a woman who'd seen much sun, but also much joy. She owned a small vineyard, not as large as the big ones, but large enough to make a living from if you worked hard. About 4 hectares with Tokaj vines, the Ferment grapes that produced high-quality sweet wines, but also dry white wines famous all over the world. The place was beautiful. The vineyards lay on the hills round the small village of Tokaj, between the Tisza River and the flat land of Hungary. The hills themselves weren't high, perhaps 200 meters, but they rose from the plain like old, sleeping giants. The soil was loam and slate, perfect for winemaking. The slate stones stored the heat of the day and released it to the grapes at night, which gave the wine its characteristic taste, bittersweet, with a depth that needed years to develop. Magdolna led me through her vineyard on an early summer morning when the air was still cool, when the grapes glittered with dew. She showed me the young grapes, still small, still green, still hard, and explained the process they would go through. This is the critical moment now, she said. The grapes must grow strong now. Too much rain and they become mealy, rotten. Too little rain and they'll be too small. It's like a dancer trying to keep her balance. She pointed at the sky. We pray for a good summer, warm, sunny, but with a little rain at the right time. Winemaking in Tokaj wasn't just business, but culture, history, tradition. Magdolna explained to me that this wine had been famous since the 17th century, that the Ottomans were in the region and the winemakers understood how to make white wine in this place, under these conditions, with these grapes. The Tokaj, the sweeter profile of the wine, was for the rich, for kings, a luxury product. "It's the sweetness, the genius of the place," she said. "We don't make the wine. The place makes the wine. We're just the hands." The secret lay in noble rot, botrytis. In an ordinary year, rot would be a disaster, would destroy the grapes. But under the right conditions, with sun, with mist from the Tisa, with perfect humidity, botrytis would concentrate the sugar in the grape, would reduce the acidity, would give the wine a complexity impossible to achieve any other way. My grandfather always said, Magdolna told me, that botrytis is a gift from the gods, but a dangerous gift. You must respect it, you must understand it, or it takes everything from you. She showed me her old press, a traditional wooden device 100 years old or older, polished by thousands of hands, by thousands of grapes. She also showed me her wine cellar, deep underground, where the French oak barrels lay and aged, grew older, more complex. It was cool there, about 13 degrees, dark, quiet. The air was thick with fermentation gases and the smell of old wood. "This is the heart of my operation," she said quietly, with a kind of awe. "Here the magic happens." I asked her how long she'd been making wine. "My whole life," she said. "I was born here, in a house 100 meters from my vineyard. My mother made wine, her mother too. We've been winemakers for so long that I don't know where the family ends and the wine begins. This isn't just my profession, it's my identity." She laughed quietly. "My husband sometimes said I loved the wine more than him. He wasn't entirely wrong. The wine is more constant than people. The wine gives you meaning." The process of winemaking was complex and careful. Magdolna explained to me the spraying, not with pesticides, but with copper-based treatments to control powdery mildew, the pruning of the vines for the best shape, the selection of ripe grapes for harvest. "Every year is different," she said. "The same vines, the same earth, but every year the grapes are different. That's what I love about this profession, the unpredictability, nature's ability to surprise you." She invited me to her family for lunch, a simple but rich meal with vegetables from the garden, bread, cheese, and of course, wine. We drank a Tokaj from her cellar, a wine from 1999 with a deep golden color, with a taste of honey and apricot and something bitter underneath. "That's a great year," Magdolna said as we drank. "The summer was perfect, warm, sunny, with enough rain. The botrytis came at exactly the right time. This wine will still be good in 20, 30 years, maybe longer." She took a sip and looked into the distance. "I won't drink it when it reaches its fullness, but that's all right. The wine is for the future. That's the beauty of it." Her son, she said, also worked in winemaking, but on a larger estate, not in the family business anymore. "That's modern," she said, without bitterness. "The times are changing. The big operations can be more efficient, can sell more. But something is lost, the personal relationship to the wine, the knowledge passed from generation to generation." She looked at me. I show you something." In the afternoon, as we wandered through her vineyards and the sun slowly set, Magdolna told me of the difficult years. The year 2012 was a nightmare. Too much rain during flowering, and the botrytis didn't come at the right time, came too early, with gray mold destroying the grapes. She lost about 40% of her harvest. It was a year when she seriously considered giving up, selling the vineyard, doing something else. But then spring 2013 came, she said, and hope came back. Hope is what keeps you going. I also watched her examine the vines. She went systematically through the rows, and she touched the leaves, looked at the stem, checked the grapes, still very green. She spoke to the vines, not in an exaggerated way, but with natural familiarity, as though speaking to old friends. "That's good. Stay strong," she said to one vine. "And you need water, I see it. The soil is too dry." She wasn't sentimental, but not mechanical either. She was present, attentive, responsible. She led me to an old cupboard and took out a notebook. Old, pages yellowed, the writing fine and hard to read. "This is my grandmother's diary," she said, "from 1930 to 1960. Here she noted when it rained, when it got hot, when the grapes were ripe, how the wine tasted, how it developed. This is knowledge that isn't in books, that can't be taught in a school. This is the knowledge of hands, of the heart." She showed me some pages, the tiny handwriting, drawings of grapes, notes in Hungarian, but also German and French. My grandmother was educated, multilingual. She understood that wine is international work, that you must learn from others, but also from yourself, from the earth you love. And now, as we leave Hungary, as the vineyards disappear behind us, I imagine Magdalena still sitting in her cellar in the cool darkness, with her barrels, with her wine, with her grandmother's notebooks. And you let your eyes close, and the taste of Tokaj remains on your tongue, sweet and bitter at once. And you glide into the land of sleep, where the wine is always perfect, where the grapes are always ripe. The night grows dark, and we're now traveling through the Bohemian lands. The air becomes different, denser somehow. And I think of a woman I met in Prague, in a narrow alley in the old town, in a workshop that felt like it came from the Middle Ages. Her name was Jana, and she was a soap maker, one of the last crafts you can still find in this form in Prague. She worked in an old workshop, perhaps from the 15th century, with thick stone walls, with small windows looking out onto the old town square. The workshop was full of scents, not unpleasant, but a blend of olive oil, of lavender, of rosewater, of ash, of herbs. It was like a botanical garden, but a garden you could smell, you could touch. Jana was a woman in her 50s, slender, with short gray hair, with hands hardened by work, the skin at the joints dark from the influence of chemicals. Not chemicals in the modern sense, but the traditional oils and ash that had been used for thousands of years for soap making. She always wore a white apron and a headscarf, not for practical reasons, but as part of a tradition she respected, that she lived. The history of soap was longer than you might think. Jana told me that the Romans already made soap, that the Arabs refined the technology, that it came to the Austrians and Hungarians, and to the Czechs. Every culture had its own methods, its own secrets. The Czech method was something quite special, a combination of ash obtained from a particular wood, of olive oil and other oils, of water that had to be gathered from a particular well not far from the workshop. The making of soap wasn't a simple process. Jana first showed me how she gathered the ash from birch wood, which she burned in a special furnace under very careful temperature control. Then came the extracting of the lye. The water was poured slowly over the hot ash repeatedly, and the water that came out was dark and alkaline, sharp and burning. "That's the heart of the soap," Jana said. "Everything else comes after. This liquid, that's the secret." The next step was mixing with the oils. Jana had a large copper kettle, old, green with verdigris, in which she mixed the water with the oils. The mixture had to be heated slowly, with constant stirring, with constant watchfulness. "If you don't pay attention, it gets too hot, and then everything is lost," Jana said. "The temperature must be exactly right, hot enough for the chemical reaction, but not so hot that it gets out of control." She stirred with a long wooden stick, a rhythm that was hypnotic, calming. The mixture had to stay in that kettle for several days while the fats slowly transformed into soap. That was the magical reaction between the lye and the oils, the first great chemistry humanity discovered. During this time, Jana watched the consistency, the scent, the color. She could only by sight and smell know when the soap was ready. I don't use tests, no modern things, she said. It's just experience. You develop an instinct, a feeling. After 40 years of making soap, you just know it. When the soap was ready, it was poured into molds, old wooden molds that Jana had carved herself, or her grandfather, or his grandmother. Each mold was different. Some were simple, rectangular. Some had patterns carved into them, symbols, names. The soap in the molds had to then be stored for several weeks in a cool, dry room while it hardened. This is the most important part, Jana said. Many people want the product right away, but good soap needs time. Time isn't something you can avoid. Time is part of the process. I spent a day in the workshop with Jana, and it was like traveling to another time. The rhythm was slow. The work couldn't be hurried. There was no rushing, no pressure. There was only the work that needed to be done, at the speed it could be done. I helped her gather the ash, measure the oil, take new soaps from the molds. My hands became dark with ash, became smooth with oil. At the end of the day, my hands smelled like a strange mixture of lye and scents, but also, strangely, clean. Very clean. Jana also showed me her collections of scents. Hundreds of small bottles, some of glass, some of ceramic, with labels that were handwritten. Lavender, rose oil, bergamot, cypress, camphor, mint. She said that every season had its own scents. In summer, the light, fresh ones, the cooling mint and cypress. In autumn, the warmer, spicier fragrances, the camphor, the eucalyptus. In winter, the heavy, the comforting ones, the roses, the lavender. Scent is more than just the smell, Jana said. Scent is memory, emotion. Good soap shouldn't just wash your hands. It should calm you, give you happiness, give you the memory of something beautiful. She sold her soaps at the market, not in large quantities, not to industry, but directly to people who understood what she did. She had loyal customers, she said, who came year after year, whose names she knew, who knew which soap was good for which season, which for sensitive skin. That's my business, she said. The people, they know I make good soap with good materials, without the chemicals that are everywhere else. And they pay a fair price for it. That's fair. They get quality and I can make my living. Jana told me she'd inherited the workshop from her mother, and her mother from her father. It's not a romantic life, she said, while she stirred a new batch of soap. It's hard work, the hands hurt, the eyes are sometimes red from the lye. The earnings aren't great. You can live from it, but you won't become rich. She paused. But it's a life that fulfills you, gives you meaning. You make something that people need, that makes them more beautiful, that keeps them clean. That's not nothing. We drank tea together in her small kitchen behind the workshop, and she showed me old photo albums, pictures of her grandmother, of her grandfather, of earlier generations, all in this same workshop, all with this same work. The photographs were old, the colors faded, but the faces were alive, present. That's my life, Jana said. My life is here in this workshop, with this kettle, with these scents. When I grow older, when my hands can't do it anymore, then I'll need to find someone to continue it. But where do you find someone who wants to learn the old method? All young people want something else, something simpler, something modern. She had a niece, though, she told me, who might be interested. The niece was 24, studied chemistry, but she came sometimes to the workshop and helped. Perhaps, Jana said, with cautious hope, the niece could continue the craft, could carry on the tradition. It would be different, Jana said. She won't make the same soap I do. She'll probably use modern methods, new techniques, new scents. But that's all right. That's how it should be. Every generation must make its own soap. And now, as we leave Prague, as the old houses, the narrow alleys, the churches disappear behind us, I imagine Jana still sitting in her workshop, in the scent of lavender and oil, with her hands in the soap, with her rhythm, her instinct, her understanding that good things need time, and you close your eyes, and the scents of Prague mingle with the scents of soap, and you glide gently into sleep, where everything is white and pure, where your hands are clean, and the world smells of roses. The train takes a slow curve, and I notice you shift a little closer to the window, curious about what's out there. We're heading into the Carpathians now, into the Romanian mountains, and it reminds me of a man I met in the hills between Sibiu and Brașov, in a small village so tiny it barely marks the map. His name was Costin, and he was an organ builder, one of the oldest trades in Europe, a craft that's filled churches with music since the Middle Ages. Costin was perhaps in his 70s, with white hair that stood in all directions, with eyes the blue of a child's, with a lean frame despite having spent his whole life in that workshop of his. The workshop sat in an old stone house on the village edge, thick walls, little windows looking out toward the Carpathians, the forests, the lakes. Inside was like stepping into a forest of wood and metal. Pipes everywhere, hundreds, no, thousands of them, all sizes, wooden ones and metal, tin and copper and lead. Tools scattered about, planes, saws, knives, tiny chisels, all ancient, all well-worn, all precisely made. Spools of yarn, wool, hemp for binding the pipes, and everywhere the smell of wood, deep and old, like the heart of a tree itself. Costin showed me first his collection of wood samples, different types from different parts of Europe. The pine from the Alps was best for the pipes, he said. Hard, but not too hard. It resonated beautifully, held its shape. Oak for the larger structures, the frames, the parts that bore weight. Fir for the finer work. Wood isn't just material, he told me. It's the soul of the organ. A good organ, it has a good soul. Building an organ wasn't simple work. Costin explained that a traditional church organ contained thousands of parts. Each pipe had to be made individually, tuned carefully, each one set to a precise frequency. A large instrument could take years. My last one, he said, was for a church in Sibiu. 50 keys, 30,000 pipes. That took 6 years. 6 years, just one person, just these two hands. He showed me the carving of the wooden pieces, the ornamentation, the curves, the patterns that made each organ unique. This was artistry that only hands could manage, only an artist's eye could understand. Costin worked slowly, carefully. He'd take a piece of wood, examine it from every angle, feel the grain, sense the inner tensions of the material. Then he'd cut, not with broad strokes, but with many small ones, patiently, with real understanding for the wood, for what it was. I asked why he'd chosen this work. I didn't choose it, he said. It chose me. A quiet laugh. My father was an organ builder, his father too, his father as well. 5 generations back at least, maybe more. I was born in this workshop. It's in my blood. There's no choosing in these things. He told me about the organs he'd built, churches across Transylvania, Hungary, some in Germany and Austria too. Each one different, shaped to the church's acoustics, the priest's wishes, the traditions of the region. An organ isn't just a musical instrument, he said. It's an instrument of the soul. When you walk into a church and hear a great organ playing, you feel God's presence, or at least you feel something vast, something eternal. I spent a day in his workshop watching him work. The way his hands moved the tools was rather like a conductor moving his baton, precise, full of feeling, understanding something larger than the individual movements. He was working on a pipe, a middle-sized one, wood and tin, and the process was intricate. First carving the body, then boring the hole for the voice, then regulating the voice with tiny measurements, tiny adjustments, until the tone was absolutely right. "Do you hear the difference?" he asked me, playing one pipe, making a small adjustment, playing again. The differences were terribly subtle to my ear, but to him they were obvious. Each note needed a certain quality, a certain tone color that harmonized with the others. "It's like painting," he said. "The artist must understand all the colors, how they sit together, how they speak to one another." Costin had no sons or daughters to carry on the trade. that grieves me," he said. "But times change. Churches don't have the money for organs any longer, and the young people want different careers." He gestured around the workshop. "When I can't work anymore, when these hands fail me, this workshop closes. That's the end of a line 500 years old." He showed me letters, too, from churches all across Europe, priests thanking him for the organs, describing how the music had changed their congregations, enriched their services. "That's my wealth," he said, reading them carefully. "Not money, it's never been that. But knowing that something made with these hands, that it's changed people's lives, that it fills churches with music that will last for thousands of years. That's enough." I was struck by the historical depth of his craft. He showed me old books on organ building, Johann Adlung from the 18th century, Arnaud van Zwolle from the 15th, with drawings showing the very same principles Costin still used. "The craft hasn't fundamentally changed," he said. "The science behind it, the physics, that's thousands of years old. The Romans already understood acoustics, air vibration, sound. I use the same principles, just with the tools I have, the materials available to me." Yet he was trying to document his techniques, in notebooks, in drawings, a kind of secret codex describing how to choose the wood, how to cut the pipes, how to regulate the voices. "Perhaps," he said, "someday someone will find these notebooks and understand what I've tried to preserve. Perhaps someone will rediscover the craft." I also watched him working on a new project, a small chamber organ for a collector in Vienna. Not large like the church instruments, but more detailed, more ambitious in its design. He showed me the plans, very precise drawings in black ink with scales and notes. "That's communication," he said. "When I work with a client, the plans are our language. The client can see what I'm building, and I can see what they expect. It's a partnership, not just a transaction." Before I left, Costin played me a tune on an old, small organ, an ancient Romanian melody, quite simple, but beautiful in that way old melodies are beautiful. The music filled the little workshop, filled the space, filled my heart. I watched Costin playing, and the music wasn't just the organ, but also the man, his life, his skill, his love for the craft, all woven together into that single melody. And now, as we wind through the Carpathians, as the mountains darken beneath the moon, I imagine Costin still there in his workshop, with his pipes and his tools and his notebooks. And if you close your eyes, you can hear the music still, that old Romanian air, the one his hands drew from the organ. And you drift gently into a night full of old music, old crafts, old and good things. You're on the train from Bayreuth to Hof, and beside you, a woman is just waking. Her rucksack smells of forest and earth, and there are little pine needles caught in her hair. She looks at you and smiles. She tells you about her summer walks. You know, the best time for mushroom hunting is just after a warm rain in June or July. That's when the whole earth comes alive. I lead groups through the forests here, between Bayreuth and Hof. First, I show them how to spot the bay boletes. They have those fine red pores under the cap, and they always grow near old spruces. People think mushrooms appear at random, but no, each sort has its preference. The penny buns, they love the lean soil under the pines, where there's not much else growing. July is when the Hexenhörlinge season starts. They're poisonous, mind you, but beautiful to look at. Orange-red caps, fine threads on the stems. I teach people to respect them, not destroy them. We gather only the penny buns, chestnuts, perhaps chanterelles if we're lucky. I always say, take only what you need. The forest gives generously, but it needs time to rest as well. The moisture in the coniferous forest is perfect for mushroom growth. The dense moss, the fallen spruce cones, all of that creates the ideal climate. When you walk into the older stands, where the trees are over 100 years old, I feel like I'm in an underground city. The mushrooms are like the root network, the trees communicating with each other. Every mushroom is connected to the roots of the firs and spruces all around. Last month I came across a fly agaric. Absolutely stunning, red with white flecks, just like in the storybooks. It stood quite alone on a little clearing. I didn't touch it, just photographed it. Fly agarics are part of this forest too. Highly poisonous, of course, but part of the system. No one needs to eat them. They're simply allowed to be. The nicest moment is when the whole group goes quiet all at once. That always happens when we find a family of penny buns, 3 or 4 together, like babies with their mother. Then I hear only breathing, the crunch of leaves underfoot, birdsong higher up. In those moments, everyone forgets their mobile phones, their stressful lives. The forest does that to you. It makes you still and attentive. The penny bun, Boletus edulis, that's the king. The cap surface smooth, brown, velvety to touch. The stem white at the top, cream-colored below with that fine network pattern. When you cut one, the flesh stays white. That's important. It doesn't turn blue like the poisonous sorts. I know an old mushroom guide. He's nearly 80 now, and he can smell a penny bun before he sees it. I always ask him how that's possible. He says, "Love takes time." You also need to know when not to gather. In the nature reserves, you photograph only. And in the young plantations, where the foresters are raising the next generation of trees, leave the mushrooms there, because everything's still so new. Respect for the system. That's what I teach everyone. And then the ethics of gathering. Never take the last ones. Cut them rather than pull them, so the mycelium beneath isn't damaged. When I lead the tours, I sometimes see people who've never really experienced a forest before. They live in cities, everything digital and fast. And then they put their nose to a mushroom and actually smell, properly smell, and their eyes go wide. It's magical. I tell them about the fungal networks running under their feet, kilometers long, connected to every tree here. The forest isn't silent. It's speaking all the time, just not in words. The woodland art of mushrooms. It truly is an art. Some mushrooms glow in the dark when you photograph them. Little luminous ones, barely bigger than your fingernail, giving off light so they can spread their spores. Nature's infinitely clever. Everything serves a purpose. Once you've understood that, you never look at a forest the same way again. There are also the chanterelles, though I haven't really mentioned them yet. Golden, bright yellow, and you find them often in large families in high summer. They smell of apricots, truly, not a fairy tale. When you hold a handful in your hands, that scent spreads, warm and honeyed. The flesh is firm, not flimsy like other mushrooms. You can gather them, put them in a basket, never a bag that makes them black and mushy. And they take that smell home with them. Your whole kitchen smells of it. In June, when the first warm nights come, when the moisture hangs in the air like a fine veil, that's the great time. I sometimes wake at 5 in the morning before the heat starts and walk to my favorite places, where a little stream runs past, where the soil is black with old humus, where the spruce roots jut from the earth like skeletons. And then you find them, penny buns that grew overnight, firm and plump, their flesh still cool from the night air. There's no better feeling than that find. It's like a surprise the forest gives you. In August, when the heather blooms and the days are warm, you find sometimes hidden between the bilberry bushes the fine flecks of chestnut boletes, brown on top, yellow below, and when you cook them they smell like nutty, ripe chestnuts. A handful of chestnut boletes in butter in the pan, that's a feast for the senses. But first I show people how to identify the pores. With the poisonous sorts, the pores can turn blue. That's your warning sign. High summer temperatures are brutal for mushrooms. They like it damp, but not too hot. So I plan my tours for early mornings or late afternoons when the sun sits lower. That's also the best time for photographing. The light's so golden, so warm. It turns every mushroom into a small artwork. I've gathered thousands of images, cataloged them, noted them carefully. Which mushroom, what location, what ear found. It's like a diary of my forest, my life almost. And each picture is proof that this place exists, that this beauty is real. Summer evenings are beautiful in the forest, too. Sometimes I stay until dusk falls, when the last rays of sun come golden through the tree crowns. The light makes the fine fibers of the mushroom caps visible, and then you hear all the forest sounds at once. Beetles, earthworms under the leaves, perhaps a deer picking its way carefully through the undergrowth. The forest has its own symphony. People often ask if I'm ever afraid in the forest. No, the forest isn't dangerous when you respect it. The big animals, the large predators, they're not here. It's safe. The forest is like one large, breathing being, and when you understand its rhythm, when you walk slowly and really look and really listen, then you become part of it. You're no longer the visitor. You belong there. The mushroom world gives me peace. Every summer, again and again, the damp earth under my fingers, the warm moss, and the smell of forest, of moisture, of life. So much life in a handful of soil. You can feel it when you grow still, perfectly still, and listen. And so we traveled on, the train and I, and the few other passengers around me, each in our own small corner of the world, each on our own journey towards sleep. The warmth of the carriage, the soft hum of the heating, the click-clack of the wheels on the rails, it all became one shared song, a song without words, a song that carries you and quietens you and says, you can let go now. You can rest now. The train carries on for you. Time carries on for you. The world takes care of itself while you sleep. You're on the train from Berchtesgaden to Ramsau, and next to you sits a woman with damp hair and bright eyes. Her hiking boots glisten with water and mud. She turns to you and tells you of her passion. I seek out waterfalls. That's my work, my life, my obsession. Not the famous ones you see in the tourist brochures. I collect the small ones, the hidden ones, the secret ones. The waterfalls only a handful of people see each year. I make maps, I write data. How high is the drop? How wide the pool below? When's the best season to visit? The Alps are full of them, you understand. Thousands of little waterfalls that nobody knows. The water here is different from elsewhere. It comes down from the highest peaks, bitterly cold, full of minerals. It has a color, sometimes jade green, sometimes gray-white like champagne foam. When the snowmelt is particularly strong in June and July, when the snowfields in the high country melt, tiny streams become mighty falls. I have one waterfall I see just twice a year, June and July. The other months it's nearly dry, just a trickle. But in June, the water crashes down with such force you're still drenched 50 meters away from the spray. The difficulty is finding them. The maps don't show them all. Many are too small, too insignificant, or they hide themselves in gorges where the forest is so thick you can barely pass through. I trace streams uphill. That's the method. I start at a ditch at the forest edge and follow it. Wherever the water grows louder, wherever I hear a roar, there might be a waterfall. Sometimes it's 3 meters, sometimes 15. Every one counts. The finest feature of any waterfall is the moss decoration. When a waterfall stands long in one spot, when water strikes the same rock formation day after day, Moss grows there. Green, delicate, living moss. It becomes like a carpet, and when sunlight filters through the trees, when the waterfall's spray dampens that fine moss carpet, the whole place glows green like a jewel. It's almost supernatural in its beauty. I've photographed such moments, and even experienced photographers have said, "That can't be real. You must have oversaturated the colors." But no, it's real. I sometimes lead other people to these places. I show them how to listen for where the water is. You need only listen. The water speaks. It tells you, "I'm here, follow me." It's like music seeping through the forest. And then, when we come round the corner, when this mist suddenly rises and enfolds you, when you smell that raw, primordial scent of water and wet rock, I see it in their eyes. They understand. The forest isn't silent. The forest sings. The geology is fascinating. Waterfalls form where the rock layers are of different hardness. Water erodes the soft layers faster, and then a step appears, a break in the stream. The waterfall is the result of millions of years of erosion. When you sit on a stone beneath a waterfall, when you hear the water thundering all around you, you're sitting in the presence of something very, very old. The waterfalls were here before people came. They'll be here long after we're gone. The pool below each waterfall, that's its heart. That's where the falling water loses its energy and grows calm. Some pools are so deep you can't see the bottom. Some are barely a meter deep. I know for each waterfall on my maps exactly how deep the pool is, what temperature the water holds, what sort of fish live there. There are little mountain trout that have adapted to extreme conditions, the bitterly cold water, the fierce currents. They're tiny, swift, and beautifully silvery. The best time to work is summer. The days are long, the weather's reasonably stable, and the stream levels are high enough to be interesting. I'm out every day. I start in the morning when it's cool and the forest is waking. The birds sing, insects are active. And I follow my stream, now left, now right, always higher. Sometimes I reach an alp where there are no more trees, just grass and stones. It's cold up there, even in summer, and windy. But the waterfalls there are the finest, too, the clearest. My greatest discovery was last month. I was following a stream I'd walked 100 times before, but this time the water was higher because of a storm the night before, and I saw on the right side, hidden between two overhanging rock boulders, a waterfall I'd never noticed before. It wasn't large, perhaps 10 meters, but it was perfect. The pool was large and still, the forest around it thick and green. It was like a secret garden, just for me and the water. I've learned to read the waterfalls like a book, too. The water writes its story into the rocks. You see these smooth, concave curves in the rock face? That's from millions of years of water spiraling down. The stone becomes polished, smooth as glass. And when you place your hand on it, it's so smooth, so cool. And then the colors. Some waterfalls have red or orange stripes from iron ore in the rock. Others have gray or black patches. Every waterfall has its own structure, its own speed, its own voice. The power of water is incredible. When you stand long beside a large waterfall, when you hear the thunder, when the whole air vibrates with that energy, you understand that water will reshape everything. Patiently, but certainly. No stone is hard enough. No mountain is high enough. Everything will be ground, polished, transported. Water always wins. I have favorite seasons for individual waterfalls too. Some are best in summer when the snowmelt comes. Others are lovelier in autumn when the air is clearer and you can see further. There are ones that are best just after rain. There's one particular waterfall, 3 hours walk from here, that I visit only after rain. Then the water truly crashes down with that wild force. On other days, it's too weak. When I write my notes, When I enter the data on my maps, I feel like an archivist. I'm preserving these places. I'm holding them fixed in words, in coordinates, in photographs. If one day I can't walk, if I grow old and can't go to the mountains, then I have these memories. And perhaps someone else will walk my paths, discover my waterfalls, feel the same love. The sound is most important. Some people say the quiet in the mountains is soothing, but for me it's the sound of water, the rushing, the roaring, the murmur. It's like white noise. It erases everything else. Your worries, your stress, your thoughts, everything's overlaid by this one simple sound. The water is like a meditation. You don't need to speak a mantra. The water is the mantra. And when I dream at night of my waterfalls, when I still have that scent in my nose, that moss smell, that scent of water and stone and damp earth, then I'm there again, at every waterfall. The water rushes, the moss glows green, and I sit on a wet stone and the spray touches my face. So cool, so alive. Everything becomes still. Everything becomes sleep. I closed my eyes. Just for a moment, I thought. Just for a moment. But then images came behind my eyelids. No clear pictures, just colors. Soft colors, blue and gray, and a little gold from the carriage lamp. And those colors mingled into something that was no longer seeing and not yet dream. The train carried on, ta-dum, ta-dum, and each ta-dum was a little further away, as if the train wasn't quite in the same space as me anymore, as if I were already halfway elsewhere, halfway in that country where tiredness lives, where everything grows simple. You're on the train from Eberswalde to Angermunde, and beside you sits a woman in green work clothes. Her hands are rough and strong. She looks out the window and speaks quietly to you of her summer days. Every dusk I sit up there in my high hide. It's an old wooden structure, perhaps 5 meters up, tucked between 2 thick oaks. From there you can see across a good portion of my forest, about 20 hectares. My forest. That's a responsibility I feel every day. It's not just a job, it's a love. I'm a forester, but I'm also a keeper of this place. The hide is my observation post. I sit there in those last 2 or 3 hours before sundown, and I watch. The roe deer come then, the hares, sometimes even the fox. The animals have their routines, their paths. One roe always comes at the same time, from the same place, goes to the same grass tufts. It's reassuring. It tells me the forest is in balance, that the animals feel their safety. The composition of my forest matters, not just for economics, but for ecology. I have too many spruces, that's a problem. They're vulnerable to bark beetles, especially in warm, dry summers. So I'm planning a slow transformation. Take out old spruces, plant young beeches and oaks. That's the future. A mixed forest is a healthy forest. The beeches, they're so elegant. In summer, their leaves are like thin green glass when the light shines through. And the wood, that's valuable. But it takes time, 50, 60 years at least. In the hide, I also read my forestry plans, my woodland inventory reports. There's light enough until dusk, and then when the sun drops lower, when that golden hour arrives, I put the papers away. Then I simply watch. That's the holiest part of my day. The forest symphony grows loud. The birds sing their evening songs, the insects hum, and then the larger animals emerge. A buck, I know him by his behavior. He's always alone, cautious, nervous. He has his crown, his antlers, they gleam in the light. A buck in summer is beautiful, his coat a gold red. The doe, the female, is softer, more delicate. And the fawns, the young deer, they're so clumsy, so playful. When I watch a fawn appear in the hide territory for the first time, I know the population is healthy. That pleases me more than any timber sale. In June and July, when there's still long light, I can sit up there until 9 in the evening. The nights are short, the sky barely darkens. It's like a state between day and night. The birds quieten slowly, the dusk turns deep blue, and then when the moon rises, the forest becomes silver lit again. In those moments, I forget the paperwork, all the regulations and rules. I'm just a woman in the forest, watching. The moonlight makes everything new again. The trees look different, the paths turn silver, and the animals grow more active. The night forest is like another world, a world that opens when day ends. There are also days when nothing happens. I sit for 4 hours and see only a few birds. That's fine, that matters too. The quiet, the silence, the waiting. It teaches me patience. It helps me understand that not everything needs to produce a result. The moments where nothing happens, they're as valuable as the moments when the roe appears. The hide is also my therapy. I've had difficult times, divorce, professional crises, illness. But up here, among the trees, watching the animals, feeling the rhythm of nature, something heals here. The worries grow smaller, not because I forget them, but because I put them in perspective. A roe has no worries like mine. It simply lives, it's present, it's now. That's what I learned from the forest. The present moment is what matters. The hide itself is important for hunting, of course. I'm also a hunter. Forester and hunter are often the same thing. The wildlife population must be regulated. Too many roe means browsing damage. The deer eat all the young trees. That's a real problem. So we cull a certain number each year. That's not cruelty, it's stewardship. I look after the forest's health, and sometimes that means taking individual animals. I do it, but I don't enjoy it. And I do it swiftly and precisely, with respect. The structure of the hide is robust and simple. Wooden posts, wooden floor, 4 walls with firing ports, a roof on top. Below, it's open and light, so I can see all around. I renovated the hide myself 3 years ago. The wood was weathered, the nails rusted. I put in new boards, new roof. Now it's solid for another 10 years. The forest rewards such work. The animals know this hide is safe. They come closer because everything's stable, quiet, familiar. The dusk here is really special. There's this one moment, a single minute, where the colors shift. The green of the leaves, which looks the same all day, suddenly becomes golden. The shadow lines grow deeper. The temperature drops 3-4 degrees, and the birds, they go silent for a moment, as if holding their breath. And then the eagle owl, my favorite bird, begins to call. That's my signal that day is ending, night is coming, and I need to climb down. Sometimes I see traces, the fur of a hare that's past a tree trunk, the track of a fox, deep and certain, the forest crow pecking below. All these signs tell me the story of my forest. I gather this information, and it helps me make decisions. Which trees should fall, which should remain. How can I make the forest even better for the animals that live here? Summer is intense. The heat, the dryness, it stresses the forest. The bark beetles become active. I have to stay watchful, set traps, quickly remove infested trees. But from the hide, I can see where the problems are. A tree that yellows, that discolors faster than the others, that's my warning signal. Then I climb down, check it, act quickly. The hide is my eye over the forest. Sometimes visitors come up in the hide with me. I like to bring them there. And when they see the animals for the first time, when they understand what this closeness means, I see the wonder in their eyes. It's like a poison, this closeness. Once felt, they want more. They also understand better then why we must protect the forest, why this balance matters. The stars are part of my hide life too. When it truly grows dark, when my eyes adjust to the darkness, I see the Milky Way. So many stars. And below, the forest, dark green, mysterious, full of life. I sit between two worlds, the stars above, the forest below. It's sacred. It's here that I come most fully to myself. And then when night is truly deep, when I spread my arms and breathe this air, this pure forest air, cool and smelling of earth and green, then I know that life here continues. Without me, with me, it doesn't matter. The forest will endure. The animals will come and go, the trees will grow, and I sit in my hide and watch, and the dusk turns blue, and my eyes grow heavy, and the forest sings its lullaby. My eyes grew heavy, so heavy, as if someone had gently placed a warm hand on my eyelids and said, "Now it's good. Now it's enough for today." And I heard the train, ta-dum, ta-dum, and I heard the quiet breathing of another passenger already asleep, and I heard the distant rush of wind at the window panes, and all these sounds were like a soft blanket laid over me, layer upon layer, warmth upon warmth, until I felt nothing except the gentle glide of the train through the night.